Hello everyone. We're going to travel the world tonight and dig a little bit under the surface to explore the diversity and extraordinary organization of ants and their societies. Do you know that ants live almost everywhere on the planet, except in remote regions like Antarctica or a few small islands in the Pacific? That some species of ants invented a form of agriculture more than 50 million years before mankind. That around us, wherever we live, in our forests, in our fields, in our gardens, under our feet when we cross the street, there is a fierce competition and sometimes wars raging between different species or different colonies of ants. And also that, like other social insects, such as bees, for example, ants may form what biologists call superorganisms. This is what we're going to explore tonight. There are thousands of different species of ants, and they have different characteristics and behaviors. So we will spend more time on some of them, learn how these tiny insects reproduce, colonize, communicate, feed themselves, fight sometimes, and build their nests. Before we begin our journey, take your time to relax your body. Think about each of your limbs individually and let go of the tension. Release the tension in your shoulders too, and breathe normally. You don't need to watch this video to follow the story, so you can shut your eyes anytime and just let the sound of my voice guide you through it. If you wish to download this video or the audio, this is possible from my Patreon page. There is a link in the description. And now, let's begin our exploration journey. Everybody knows ants because they can appear anywhere, even on the pavement, in the center of a city. It is not really that they invade our space, we invaded theirs first. Ants have been around for dozens of millions of years, almost everywhere on our planet. The oldest remains of ants have been found in fossilized amber that dates back 100 million years ago. It is believed that they evolved from wasps. They lost their wings, even though some particular ants still have wings. We will see that later. They often lost their ability to sting, and they became terrestrial insects. In the tree of evolution, ants belong to the same order as wasps and bees, an order called Hymenoptera. It is believed that the first ants, or the ancestors of the ant species that exist today, could be as old as 168 million years. They were already around when dinosaurs walked the earth, and they have survived and thrived through every extinction since then. Like many orders of animals, ants started their evolution process modestly. During the Cretaceous, at the beginning, they would have represented only 1% of the entire insect population. But 60 million years ago, at the beginning of another period called the Paleogene, they diversified dramatically and rose to more than 20% of the insect population. We know it thanks to the study of fossil deposits. The success of ants has not been stopped since then. Some species disappeared, but they have resisted every climate change, every disaster, and every extinction of species on Earth. They are not endangered by human activity, quite the opposite for some species of ants. This is also something we'll come back to later. And the key to their success is their ability to adapt to very different environments and the multiplicity of species and social organizations they have. Whatever the conditions in the environment, there are always a few species that can thrive. More than 10,000 different species of ants have been identified, and it is estimated that more than 20,000 exist. The main characteristic we associate with ants is that they are social insects. They live in colonies. Individuals are specialized, and each of them is entirely devoted to the group. Ants share this characteristic with bees and wasps, but apart from these insects, there are other animals that have similar behaviors. Biologists speak of eusocial insects with the prefix eu, eu. From Greek, it means good, and eusociality is an extreme form of community in a group of individuals from the same species. It is defined by various characteristics. The care of offspring is cooperative. There are no parents living with their offspring and forming a smaller cell, like a family, within this society. There is also a division of labor, including the reproductive labor. And this division of labor creates groups within a colony that are highly specialized. Each individual belongs to a caste and cannot be polyvalent. So in a sense, eusociality is an extreme form of sociality. As humans are social beings, we live in groups, like most mammals, but we don't go as far as adopt a different morphology within our species and specialize in only one function. Typically, ants do it, but not all of them. We will review different social organizations. They have queens and reproductive males that take care of reproduction, and soldiers and workers that work together to ensure the survival of the colony and its brood. But ants, wasps, and bees are not the only order of animals with eusocial behavior. There are other examples, like termites. Termites also are insects, but they are not related to ants and could be even older, maybe up to 250 million years. The fact that they adopted a social organization that looks very much like ants is considered to be an example of convergent evolution. Two species that are not closely related may end up looking almost the same or sharing a similar capability or behaving the same way, because it works for them, and they have evolved in the same direction, generation after generation. There are other examples of eusocial behaviors, like in some species of shrimps, and even one of mammals. There is a rodent called the naked mole rat, which is a very ugly animal living in the Horn of Africa. Naked mole rats form clusters averaging 80 individuals that live together in a system of tunnels that they built in African deserts. Only one female and 1 to 3 males can reproduce. All the others are sterile workers. Some of them specialize in gathering food, and the others defend the nest. The young produced by the queen, the reproductive female, are taken care of by the entire group. For the species that adopted it, this kind of organization can do wonders. We will see it with ants, but in the case of mole rats, their social organization allows them to survive underground in very arid regions where no other large group of mammals could. Now the number of ants in a colony and their degree of cooperation can vary greatly. An example of ant that lives in relatively small colonies and where the specialization of each individual is not extreme is the jack jumper ant, native from Australia. These ants are relatively big. They measure half an inch. The queen is a bit bigger, and each individual remains relatively independent. Their colonies have a few hundred individuals at most, sometimes less than 100. The creation of a colony starts with a queen that will mate with one or several males during its nuptial flight. The young queen has wings that it loses later. Once it has been fertilized, the queen finds a place to start laying eggs, and as she is alone at the start, she hunts to feed her young. It is common in this species to have several queens in the same nest. Sometimes a young queen stays in the nest where it was born, or finds adoption in another nest. Its offspring will start collecting food for the colony. Like most ant species, they are omnivorous and they can feed on plants, dead animals, or small prey they hunt. Jumperjack ants are venomous and they can sting. Their venom is very powerful and can easily kill another insect. But these ants show little cooperation in the gathering of food. They search for it alone and will not call other ants when they find a source of food. Roles are not set forever, neither. A worker will generally not reproduce, but they are not unable to. Sometimes they can start reproducing and lay fertilized eggs that will develop as females. There are colonies where, after the queen's death, the colony keeps functioning with one or several of these ex-workers' ants that have replaced it. Typically, this kind of society where roles can be reversible and individuals keep a degree of autonomy in their activity works only with relatively small groups, up to a few hundred ants. When a queen is present, other workers will typically check and prevent another worker from becoming fertile. They perceive when a worker is changing behavior through chemical signals that inform of the reproductive status. But once a queen is dead, an ant may take its place. The existence of a colony with multiple individuals obviously requires communication. So, how do ants communicate between them? They do it mostly through pheromones, touch, and sound. Pheromones are very important. Ants perceive smells with their antennas, which are long and mobile. Ants, especially workers, are experts at creating trails of pheromone that others can follow. In a large colony where ants collaborate to gather food, when a forager ant finds food, it comes back to the colony, leaving a trail of pheromone on the soil. Other ants follow the trail, and if they also find food, they reinforce it on their way back. If they don't, they will not leave pheromones. Through this process of trial and error, ants create a network of trails that guides every individual and that constantly evolves with their environment. For example, if an obstacle blocks a trail to a food source, foragers leave the path to explore new routes. If an ant finds one that is successful, it leaves a new trail on its return. Where we only see the entrance of an ant colony, ants perceive a web of trails that extends all around it and connects their nests with the surroundings. The use of pheromones is not limited to making trails. When an ant is crushed, it emits an alarm pheromone that signals danger, and this smell attracts ants from farther away and sends them into an attack frenzy. Pheromones are so important to the cohesion and functioning of their society that a big part of an ant's body is dedicated to produce them. They have multiple glands all over their body, including on the legs, that can produce pheromones. Another way of communication between ants from the same group is with the exchange of pheromones mixed with food between two individuals. This mouth-to-mouth transfer is called trophallaxis. It is not just a gesture of recognition and exchange between two members of the same colony, the same family. It is a way of informing other colony members of their task group: forager, nest cleaner, soldier. On top of smells, some species of ants communicate through sounds. These sounds are generally not perceptible for us. They produce sounds by stridulation with their mandibles. The term stridulation for an animal is the act of producing sound, noise, by rubbing together certain body parts. In the case of ants, they use their mandibles. So let's take a look at the anatomy of an ant. Their shapes and sizes may vary, but they have a similar general morphology. They have three distinct body segments: the head, a middle part called the mesosoma, This segment carries the legs. Ants have 3 pairs of legs, and the wings when they have some. And the third segment, the posterior part, is called metasoma, and it contains most of the digestive, respiratory, and circulatory systems. Ants share this segmentation of their bodies with a lot of other insects, but they also have a characteristic constriction of their last segment, and they have elbowed antennas, which other insects generally don't have. Ants' bodies are made of an exoskeleton that contains their organs and protects them. They have no internal skeleton like vertebrates. They don't have lungs, neither. The exchanges of oxygen or carbon dioxide happen through very small valves in their exoskeleton. The head contains a lot of sensory organs. I didn't mention their sight yet, because most ants have poor sight, and some species are even blind. But they do have eyes, and it's interesting to take a look at them for a minute, because these eyes couldn't be more different from ours. They are called compound eyes, and this type of visual organ is found in insects and crustaceans. Our eyes, and it works the same way for many species such as birds, reptiles, fishes, other mammals, they have a single opening through which light enters. These single aperture eyes come in pairs. Having 2 eyes allows for a broader angle of vision and a better perception of depth. But compound eyes are completely different. They consist of thousands of very small photoreception units. Each of them can distinguish color and brightness. Instead of treating the image that enters through a single aperture, the insect perceives the inputs from all these separate units that have a different orientation. Compared with our eyes, these compound eyes have a poor image resolution, and insects live in a visual world that would look very blurred to us. But they can detect movement rather well, and an advantage is that they can have a very large view angle, as they have photoreception units oriented in many directions at the same time. On top of 2 big compound eyes, ants have 3 smaller, very basic eyes called ocelli on the top of the head that can detect light levels. In general, sight is not the ants' most developed sense. They are much better at detecting smells or chemicals in the air and vibrations thanks to their antennas. The head also carries 2 very strong jaws, the mandibles, contrary to our jaws that work vertically. Theirs are horizontal, and the jaws are constantly working to manipulate objects, carry food, dig to construct or maintain the nest, or to fight. The legs end in a claw that gives ants the capability to hook on and climb vertical surfaces. The bigger the colonies and the higher the specialization of individuals, we will talk about this in a minute, the more physically different individuals can be, depending on the caste they belong to. Larger ants within a colony have disproportionately larger heads with stronger mandibles, which is why they are called soldier ants. There are surprising specialization in some species. For example, honeypot ants that live in North America. Some of their workers are fed enormously from a young age, so that their bodies are completely distended, and for the rest of their lives, their role in the colony is to be a food storage unit. They remain alive and well, but their only job is to accumulate and regurgitate food on demand. So the center of everything for an ant colony is its nest. Some nests may be built in trees or underground, but there are cases when the nest is made of the bodies of ants themselves. This is the case of army ants, also known as legionary ants. These are among the most dreadful species, and we're going to take a closer look at them. Actually, the name army ants applies to a variety of species that have a similar behavior and live in Central and South America. Most ants develop a colony somewhere and control an area around their nest. Army ants don't do that. They form a nomadic colony that can collectively become a ferocious predator. Their queens can produce 3 to 4 million eggs every month. When you think about it, it is 100,000 eggs per day, which is more than one every second. This can quickly create an enormous colony. Their nomadic lifestyle is necessary because a fixed nest would quickly exhaust food supply in the surroundings. So the colony alternates nomadic and stationary phases. They rarely stay in the same place for more than a few weeks. They do not build a nest out of materials they find. They build it every day with their bodies. A few ants cling to each other by their claws, and more join them until a big living ball of ants is created. It looks chaotic, but inside the ball there are tunnels, chambers, and the queen can live in the center of it. Legionary ants do not send foragers explore the surroundings and create trails that indicate sources of food. They are much more brutal. They send entire raids of thousands of individuals that can overwhelm much bigger prey. On their way, anything that can be eaten, dead or living animals, other ants, insects, spiders, will be cut to pieces by their powerful mandibles and consumed. These large raids of ants are called marabunta, and they are feared in Central America in particular. There are so many ants that not much can be done to stop them. When the colony grows too big to keep functioning, it fissions. Either workers reject the old queen, and a new generation of several queens appears, and they each go create their colony with some of the workers, or a new queen appears and takes part of the colony with it, leaving the rest to the old queen. Army ants are loyal only to their colony. They recognize the members through their pheromones, and they attack everyone else, other species of ants or other colonies from the same species. If a queen dies without succession, it is generally the end of the colony too. Sometimes the orphan ants will join another existing colony, but most of the time they quickly disappear because they have a short lifespan and they need a constant renewal of generations. The life expectancy of an ant, if it's a worker, is relatively short, up to 1 or 2 years only. However, some queens can live much longer, and this is the case in particular for red harvester ants, a species native to the southwestern United States. Their queens can live up to 30 years and be at the head of giant colonies. Harvester ants are way less voracious than army ants. They feed mainly on seeds, and there are hoarders of seeds. The entrance to a nest can generally be spotted because of the absence of plants and small structures made of pebbles around it. These ants have a very high level of specialization and very large underground colonies. Foragers bring back seeds to the nest when they are available, and seeds are ground using their large mandibles to be stored in underground granaries. This ensures that the colony has access to food all year round. The entrance of the colony may be small, but there is a large network of tunnels and chambers underground where a highly organized society exists. Harvesters have scouts that leave the nest every morning, and when they find something, they leave a pheromone trail back to the colony so that workers can follow it and bring back the seeds, or occasionally dead insects that are also parts of their diet. Other workers spend their lives, or most of their lives, underground, working on cleaning the tunnels, expanding the colony, and taking care of the queen and the brood. Like for all other species of ants, the life of a harvester ant starts from an egg. The larva that appears from the egg does not resemble an ant yet. It goes through several stages of transformation and a metamorphosis before emerging as an adult. Until it is adult, and the process can take a few weeks, the young ant is entirely fed and taken care of by its colony's workers. Food is given to the larvae by trophallaxis, this mouth-to-mouth transfer of food that we already discussed before. The youngs need to be kept at constant temperature, so they are often moved around among the many brood chambers within the colony. In many species, the specialization of a new ant is fixed until its death, and it is influenced by the food and pheromones they receive during their growth. But in the case of harvester ants, the caste changes with age. New adults start by caring for the queen and young. Then they graduate to nest work like digging and cleaning. And later, they move to defending the nest and foraging on the surface. The reason why older ants are in charge of foraging may be because there is a high casualty rate among foragers. Ants have many predators: reptiles, small mammals, spiders, birds, and many foragers never return to the nest. It is much better for the survival of the colony if ants adopt this rule towards the end of their life, when they have already served underground. Harvester ants may collect seeds, but they are not really detrimental to plants because they also disseminate them. They provide aeration to the soil with their galleries, and they keep parasites in check. There are species that men can use to their advantage too. For example, weaver ants. Weaver ants live in trees, and they have an unique nest-building behavior. They weave leaves together using silk from their larvae, and they can develop very large colonies of up to 500,000 ants, spanning several trees. And there are cattle raisers too. They breed small insects on the leaves, and they feed for a part on a sugar-rich liquid excreted by these insects. So weaver ants have been used in China for centuries in citrus cultivation. They keep parasites and molds in check in the trees. Weaver ants may raise insects, but there is even more impressive than that. Other ants even grow their own food. There are several species called leafcutter ants. They can be found in South and Central America. Leafcutters may have the most complex and mind-blowing colony organization and colony size of all ants. Their nests are underground, and the central mound of their nests can grow to more than 30 meters across. That's 100 feet. There can be smaller radiating mounds around under a surface of up to 600 square meters. That's more than 6,000 square feet. And these giant nests can contain 8 million individuals. In order to reach such a size, the colony adopts an extremely specialized and strict system of castes, in which the differences in size and morphology between ants are extreme. A caste is responsible for cutting leaves in small fragments with their large mandibles that other workers load on their backs and bring back to the nest. They are surrounded by soldiers, and underground various other castes specialized in taking care of the queen, raising the young, cleaning the galleries, and eliminating all organic debris that could make bacteria proliferate inside the nest. Because underground, these ants do not just eat the leaves they cut, they use it as a substrate to grow their food. They could not assimilate leaves, and they don't eat them. They only feed on a fungus that they cultivate on these leaves. They have been farming like this underground for 50 million years, long before humankind discovered agriculture. The underground farms of fungus can reach the size of a basketball, and they constantly harvest what they need for food. They clean the field so that the fungus is not attacked by bacteria or other parasites. They create new growing chambers, new cultivation chambers to accompany the growth of the colony, and they evacuate outside or in designated pits all the organic remains, like dead ants, that could contaminate their nest. Leafcutters can be more of a problem for human activity because they can turn into a real pest. For example, one large nest of leafcutter ants can defoliate an entire citrus tree in just 24 hours. It works like a giant organism with hundreds of thousands of mouths. The level of division of labor and complexity of their organization is the reason why these colonies are called superorganisms. Superorganisms are a concept. A superorganism is an entity made of numerous independent organisms that work together, and at least it seems to have a goal like survival and expansion, or it produces effects like the collection of food. The concept of superorganism raises the question of what it is to be an individual. Actually, there are even scientists who have suggested that one human being could be seen as a superorganism because we live thanks to trillions of microorganisms in our digestive system, and human life would not be possible without them. Anyway, when so many individuals act together and seem to be programmed to produce effects through their cooperation, it is true that it creates a higher entity, at least conceptually. Ants or bees form probably the most common superorganisms. One characteristic of these groups is that the members seem to have no individual will. An ant will not run for its life or revolt against its condition. It is programmed or raised to do a certain task, and it does it almost like a cell in a larger individual, except that in this case the cells are physically independent from one another. Like leafcutter ants, other species can be a pest and even turn invasive. They can also extend their kingdom, even their empire, well beyond the limits of a single colony. An example of invasive ant is the red imported fire ant. This species originally comes from South America, but they were introduced accidentally, probably on cargo ships in Asia, Australia, or the United States. These red fire ants are invasive, generally because of human activity, because contrary to other ants and other insects in general, they can thrive in very hostile areas. When vegetation is removed from a place to build roads or a parking lot, this tends to eliminate most of the inhabitants. But red fire ants don't mind. They can feed on almost anything organic, vegetation or animals, and they are aggressive enough to dispute resources on the edges of their territory. The way they create colonies is also very efficient. When two new colonies are created close to one another, they tend to merge instead of fighting. So a colony can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 queens in its early stage, and when it is big enough, the queens fight until only one remains. Only this queen will survive, and the colony avoids competition. In the southeast of the United States, red fire ants tend to replace other species of ants in areas that have been urbanized, and it's a problem because their galleries can cause the roads or even small buildings to collapse. Another example of large-scale colonization by alien ants is also happening in Europe. Specialists have observed the creation of a gigantic super colony of black Argentinian ants that stretches along the Mediterranean Sea in Spain, the south of France and the north of Italy, in and out of urbanized areas. What makes this particular species extraordinary is that colonies don't fight between them and rather collaborate or live peacefully, creating an ant empire of several million nests. I told you before that ants could recognize members of their colony thanks to their smell, their pheromones. Usually they attack or avoid all other species and even colonies of their own species. But these ones don't. Across hundreds of miles, ants from the same species don't fight, either because they have a mutation or because their sense of smell has lost some of its acuity and they can no longer distinguish the very subtle variations between two colonies of their own species. Their collaborative behavior has given these ants a big advantage against native species, which is why they have spread and keep spreading quickly. There are so many of them, and between so many nests, that they are virtually impossible to eradicate. And what about ants in the entire world? It is hard to estimate how many ants live on Earth. Some estimates point to up to 1 million ants for each human being. They are absolutely everywhere, including in regions that are very scarcely populated by us. 1 million ants for each human being would mean that the biomass or the weight of ants is not that far from the biomass of humans. This success in evolution doesn't really come from how fast they can reproduce. Some species can reproduce even faster than ants. It is thanks to their adaptability to almost any environment on land, and their social organization too, that distinguishes ants from all other insects. So we have now reached the end of our little introduction to the world of ants. I hope you enjoyed it. You can now let go and fall asleep. I'll talk to you soon with another adventure. Au revoir.